City Matters.
Thank you for coming back here for a second episode on the Fog of War and Humanity. I'm your host, Richard Acritelli. To the left of me, I have my good friend here, Liam Carballal. Okay, it's good to see him here. Happy New Year, right?
Happy New Year.
Yeah, we just had a spirited discussion on American imperialism, Spanish-American War, some of the operations with Dewey in the Philippines, right around the turn of the century of the 1900s. So, which spans 1898, 1900, even into the 1900s itself.
Yep.
So what can you tell me about after the smoke clears, the dust clears, about the Philippines and about how they were controlled after the Spanish-American War?
So the issue was when Admiral Dewey went there, he had knowledge that there was a rebellion on the island, and one of the leaders of the rebellion, a gentleman by the name of Emilio Aguinaldo, was in Singapore, and Dewey suspected that this man might have some firsthand knowledge of Spanish forces on the island. So he invited him to join him. Emilio says that the U.S. government promised him independence. Dewey disputes that. I'm not going to argue over who's telling the truth there. But Dewey wanted him there specifically because he wanted to try and get some local information, including about Spanish forts, Spanish defenses on the island. Emilio comes. He immediately rallies the local forces, and he declares independence. And they begin immediately seizing control of all the villages in the outlying areas of the Philippines. They begin to start capturing these towns. The American forces, on the other hand, Dewey had just he just defeated the fleet, but he doesn't have an army to capture Manila City. So he's sitting there waiting for forces to arrive from the mainland, while Emiliano is spreading out and gaining more control of the island. Dewey, though, he does not want the Filipinos to enter Manila itself. His explanation is he's worried that the Filipinos are going to take revenge on the Spanish and start killing people arbitrarily. Aguinaldo and the Filipinos think that this is a coup and they're just trying to take the islands out from under them. Things go to a head. The war in the West, in the Cuba, that comes to an end. They have a treaty, but the U.S. seizes the Philippines sort of after the Spanish surrender, so technically they're not supposed to take it. They eventually come to an agreement. They buy it for $20 million off the Spanish. As this is going on, Emiliano is trying to get an audience with the U.S. government. They're not really interested. There's not any real communication between the two sides, and things come to a head in November 1898. The U.S. decides we're going to annex the Philippines. There's 40,000 rebels on the island. I don't know if the U.S. government was aware of how powerful this force was, or they just didn't care, or they didn't think it would be an issue.
How spread out they were, too, throughout all those islands, right?
Yeah, it's wild. I actually read one really interesting story. They made a movie about this. Because of the transition from from Spanish occupation to the rebel occupation to American fighting the rebels, there was actually a Spanish garrison held out in the jungle for 2 years of the rebellion. And it took them months and months to try and get these guys to surrender. Be like, no, you guys lost the island. You guys surrendered already. You can go home.
Yeah.
And they kept refusing. I think it just
it wasn't really in the interest, right, of the United States just to say, well, we're going to go, right?
Again, that's kind of the issue. At the same time this was going on, there was the open door policy in China. Everyone was carving out spheres, and Americans were worried that we were going to get blocked out of China. The other big issue...
And that the Chinese would revolt.
Yeah. The
right?
Boxer Rebellion.
You know who wrote that was John Hay.
Yeah.
He was the Secretary of State. He was one of Lincoln's two secretaries. It was him and Nicolay.
Oh, no kidding.
So he goes back, way back.
Wow.
And it was like a common sense document to say there's enough for everyone to take.
Yeah.
Just try to treat these people a little bit more respect so they don't revolt, right? And then you get the
they did
boxers.
revolt.
Yeah, you get the boxers, and then, communism, it's going to kind of take root a little longer away, but you get those feelings like these are all outsiders and they're exploiting us and they're taking, and, so I guess the open door policy was a good idea, right? But it was, right? What do the Europeans say to us, right? Who do you think you are? You're like the last one in here, don't tell us what to do.
Exactly.
All right.
The other issue, too, was, and this is going to be a lot more pressing when World War II rolls around, Germany sends a fleet immediately after we destroyed the Spanish fleet. The Germans send warships into the Philippine harbor, and they begin scouting out the area. So we suspect if we pull out, the Germans are just going to do what we were planning to do anyway. So it's like we might as well take it, or the Germans, or the Japanese. I think you mentioned General Pershing earlier.
Yeah, General John J. Pershing.
He had to deal with that. He had to deal with Japanese spies being arrested on the island.
He was a young officer, at that time, Blackjack Pershing, right? And I believe he tried to control the Philippines with like a sense of like common sense itself there, right? He might have been considered almost like a military governor there as well, right?
Him and Arthur MacArthur, too. They were both weirdly respectful of Philippine culture and the Philippine people. Arthur was one of the few people to actually learn the Philippine language or try to understand the Philippine people and be sympathetic to them in any way.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, what was
and then when you look at the occupation at this time, could this be seen as a strong point of American history or as a little bit of a darker point of American history?
There were a number of war crimes, so I would say darker chapter. The U.S., when we invaded initially, we had a professional army. So when fighting first broke out between the Philippine rebels and the U.S. Army in February of 1899, the U.S. Army, they smashed right through the Philippine army. So the rebels, they quickly abandoned conventional tactics and began fighting like a guerrilla war style. And when the U.S. Army, we didn't really have a lot of experience dealing with that, so we couldn't really distinguish between a guerrilla fighter and local farmers. And so we just started shooting anybody who we thought was a threat. Things broke down quickly. It's also important to understand, this is the 1890s. We don't have antibiotics yet. So a huge number of people are dying from disease. It's a nightmare all around.
Kind of like the same thing in Cuba, right? Why does Roosevelt not get the Medal of Honor as quickly as he does? He's got to wait 100 years. It's because he blasted the War Department and said, you're killing more of our men by leaving us down here.
Yeah.
We're susceptible to malaria and yellow fever. And if you go into the service, they'll put you up against a wall, right? You'll pull your pants down and they'll give you like 8 shots in your behind.
Yeah.
Because they're figuring that you might end up in third world areas or areas like even like polio. I grew up in Port Jefferson, right? St. Charles Hospital was actually a big polio hospital, right? But they did that so many years ago. Today, you still have these countries where polio is still a huge sickness. Even like Bill Gates years ago was trying to send vaccinations and
who had like polio.
Yeah. So you look at that. That's a great point that you bring up, where Americans are definitely susceptible to those conditions. It's hot, you have the tropics, they're not necessarily used to it. You're dealing with different types of animals and mosquitoes and stuff of that nature. So now let's go from one end of imperialism, kind of the other back closer to home in terms of the Panama Canal.
Yes.
What was the importance of Roosevelt's actions?
So, for basically the entire history of the Western Hemisphere, we were trying to find a shorter route from Europe to Asia. And there had already been one attempt by the French. The same guy who had built the Suez Canal tried digging one through Nicaragua, I believe. That one went to hell for the same reason we just mentioned, disease. That is, I believe, the Darien Peninsula. That area is like the most unhealthy part of the planet. Thousands died. They had to give up. Roosevelt, learning from disease prevention tactics that they had to develop from the Spanish-American War, he went in again, and I believe, was it 1900?
It's about 1900, 1901.
1901, and this is significant. He tried to buy, at that point, Panama was not an independent country. It was
Controlled by Colombia.
It was part of Colombia. He supported local rebels there, and then when they ultimately won, he just straight up seized the canal area.
Well, remember, Roosevelt ended up having a deal in place with the Colombians, and then they pulled back and they wanted more money.
Yeah.
And they called these guys a bunch of jackrabbits, and then, cut off the Pacific and Atlantic, and sent the Navy in there. And, and one thing about Roosevelt, he was controversial, he was wild, he was loud.
He put his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, but he had that hindsight of saying, this is what's important for us. And now you got Chinese firms, under the Chinese government establishing in the areas of the Panama Canal, which is we're saying today, so many years later, this is dangerous towards American security and Western security and stuff like that. But it's interesting, right? What was a quote that Roosevelt said in terms of about Congress and the government?
I took the canal and then I let Congress debate it.
I left Congress debating me, and he ends up saying along the lines, it would be 50 years before they would even figure this out. They'd have to write some noble state paper and this and that. So now we take the canal, but how do we show the French and the Europeans that we mean business? Because the French fail, right? So why does Roosevelt kind of say, this is not only good for us economically, militarily, but why is it important for us to show the Europeans of what we can do?
Well, I guess we're a rising power and we need to show our strength and our determination.
Sure.
I would say.
And it's a sense of nationalism, right? That, hey, we did this. You didn't do it. We did it, right? And we secured it and so on. And you kind of said about the medical, right, in terms of the Philippines. You have so many cases of malaria and yellow fever, right? And they have to send the doctors down there to figure out what's going on with these workers. Because they want to get them back to work, right? And then they start coming up almost with some of those cures. Because it's
mosquito nets.
And they're looking at such large cases, as bad as it sounds, right? With the large cases, they have more to go by, right? And you get people down there that are figuring on this. And those were some of the things that were stuck into me in 1994. I was supposed to go to Fort Clayton, Panama. And the guy said, you'll love it down there, this and that. We were going to do fuel missions along the canal zone. But as with anything with the Army, it changed. And they sent me to New Jersey instead. So I kind of lost
almost
that.
as nice.
I lost that on that one, And I was like, I was in college, I was working, but I was willing to say, all right, let me get down there for a couple of weeks. This is like, a pretty, neat deployment, and I had a lot of Spanish friends in the military. And they loved it down there. They spoke the language. They would look for any reason to stay down there. And those guys were funny. They'd call me Red. Hey, Red, you're gonna love it down there. But we have that relationship with that canal, and it's one of those things. One of the first things that was secured after Pearl Harbor was the canal itself. You know, it's pretty amazing.
I believe the Japanese had developed a sophisticated plan of attacking the canal during the war as well.
Yeah.
It's a lifeline.
Now, how do we look at the American behavior when it comes to Panama? What's the strengths of the Panama Canal, but what are some of the weaknesses, like you mentioned with gunboat diplomacy?
Strengths and weaknesses. I guess it's just, I don't know.
Right? Wouldn't the strengths be considered, right? It's a lot quicker to go through than around, right? Economic, military, right?
I guess, I would say because we can control it. We have a good control over connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific a lot faster.
U.S. Grant got sent to the Northwest in the Pacific, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, he wasn't watching much up there.
Yeah.
It was bad. He hadn't seen his kids, and he started drinking and everything else. But they would go down to Panama, and then because it was so narrow, they would go to American ships, across the isthmus, right?
Yep.
And there was so many soldiers who got sick from malaria and everything. And he handled that. And he was one of those guys. Bullets were flying right at him. He didn't flinch. And you had these guys get sick, and it stayed with them. And he was, I don't know, maybe he was susceptible a little bit from the U.S.-Mexico War in terms of fighting Mexico from a lot of those similar ailments that were there, those sicknesses. But it's like a pretty interesting story to read very early on.
Grant was in Panama?
He was just going across and then coming up the West Coast. So you had American ships on both sides.
Yeah.
But they also want to take Panama and secure it because it was one of those things. You couldn't even sometimes trust the routes, and that you get held up in an unfriendly government, and so on. Yeah. Now, when we look at the Roosevelt correlate, right? And you look at the Taft-Dollar diplomacy, and heck, even Woodrow Wilson, so many years later. What is the trend of the American president at this time when it comes to foreign policy?
Starting with Roosevelt?
Yeah, starting with Roosevelt.
I would say securing the American hemisphere.
Sure.
Securing the United States for defensive purposes, but also projecting strength around the world.
Have we seen that in the last couple of weeks, last month?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know what we would do with Greenland, but you can say that with the capture of Maduro. Sure. I think I said that it was the best case scenario. We're not currently fighting a war there, but I think we have been showing strength recently.
Yeah, sure. Do you think that's going to ever go away? You think if American presidents, regardless of what their political agenda is, right, what their political beliefs are, you think that will ever go away? Like, you think if a president gets really pushed when it comes to the Western Hemisphere, you think they'll respond?
I think so. There's always got to be a tipping point, right?
Sure.
You saw the rise of Hitler. You start off with the Rhineland. You go to the annexation of Austria. Czechoslovakia. At a certain point, you got to stand up.
And you see that those countries, England and France, didn't do that in their own backyard, right? Yeah. So, you look at, it's something, history does repeat itself, right? Yes. And we may be so many years older down the road, and there's every so often it's going to kind of flare up.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's going to, kind of come to, like a boiling point, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. All right. Is there any last thing that you'd like to share?
I was going to talk about the water cure in the Philippines briefly. It's been kind of when the U.S. would capture a prisoner during the Philippine insurrection, we would often try to interrogate them. And one of the processes was this thing called the water cure, where we would force water down a prisoner's throat and then stomp on them to get the water back out. And it was part of a torture technique to try and get information out of prisoners. Is it like a predecessor to waterboarding, or can you see any parallels to that?
Well, in terms of torture,
Yeah.
So, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're looking to get information, if they feel as though that information is necessary, right? But back then, you don't have the media and you don't have LOLs and pictures and this and that. So, I think that they were a little bit rougher with those sort of things. Even though you have Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, and the Geneva Convention, and all these different things. If a government wants information, if the military wants information, they're, and they feel as though it's necessary, they will go get it, right?
So the Philippine insurrection, I don't know if unfortunately is a word, but the Philippine insurrection failed, and the U.S. controlled the Philippines for the next 50 years or so. Was it worth it to take the Philippines? Was it worth it strategically, economically, to take these colonies?
Well, what do you think? You have Japan, right? Mm-hmm. You have Russia. Mm-hmm. You said it before with the German Navy coming in and out.
Yeah.
Right? It was certainly worth it.
Okay.
Because when you're looking at the start of World War II, I mean, we had military bases. They were hit very quickly by the Japanese, and MacArthur was a little controversial with how everything was just kind of sitting there waiting for him.
Yeah. But
the United States, if we were going to be taken seriously, like England, France, Germany, we had to take territories.
Yeah.
That's a big thing, and it gets ugly. It's not democratic by any means, right? Yeah. But we still control Samoa and Guam and the Caroline Islands, Marshall, Wake, all these places. And it's one of those things where our shipping had to have places that were friendly, those colon stations that we can go to.
Yeah.
And the Philippines was a jewel. It really was. It was our jewel of the Pacific, and getting into Asia and stuff. And the Chinese have been really today kind of pushing at the Filipinos. Mm-hmm. The one thing they don't want is another American base popping up over there.
Yeah.
Right? And you're gonna probably see more Americans heading over there. Air Force bases, naval.
I think they opened some bases more recently.
Yeah. You had Clark and Subic and all these other places that were in those islands, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the Chinese make mistakes in terms of, we're a strong country, this and that, but we're the lesser of the two evils.
I think they said just this week they had to purge their high command because of corruption. One of them was a U.S. spy, actually.
Yeah. The Chinese, we're kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit, but the Chinese, they haven't proved that they can do anything yet. Mm. That's the thing. The officers that fought, the junior officers that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, those are now the senior officers now. Yeah. And those guys are very well educated. Yeah. Command General Staff, Army War College, going to schools like Princeton, Columbia, Yale, where they're taught economics and, political science and different languages, and very, very well-rounded officers. They could see the big, big picture, right? And, you look at when they say history repeats itself, okay, we're back in the Philippines again.
Yep.
What did the Irish say? right? We fought the British for 1,000 years before World War II. We're not going to invite them back in, right? But they sent troops to, their citizens went over to England and they fought, and they had the English patch on one side and the Irish patch on the other side, you know. Same thing with World War I, So it sometimes strange things occur, and history comes right back, again. But all right, Liam, listen, it was great having you down here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Liam Carballal here on The Fog of War and Humanity here on hmTV. Thank you very much for joining us today.